here, and I am here with clinical psychologist Tara Feil, who is with CHI St. Alexis. Tara, first of all, welcome, and thank you so much for being with us today.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking me, Matt. I know this is a really important topic right now to cover, and I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, glad to. You and I just met a little bit ago as we were talking about mindfulness and how it's such a challenge for people to kind of manage all the emotions that go with everyday life. Yeah. Just in general, what has the last 2 weeks been like for the average person in terms of what you've seen as a likely shift in how people are feeling and processing? Just kind of what are you seeing out there?
You know, Matt, I think the last 2 weeks have turned our worlds upside down. You know, everyone from 92 years old down to 2 years old has described feeling really unsettled about what's going to happen in the coming weeks. And I think anxiety levels are certainly high. I've also been hearing depression levels rising for several of my patients as well, who are homebound in ways that they haven't been before. So that this has been a big challenge, and I think it's hit us all a lot faster than anybody might have imagined this happening.
And I was thinking, I can't even recall a time in both my life history, right, which I'm a pretty young guy compared to the 92-year-old you mentioned, but I used to teach history, and I can't conceive of a time in history where there's been a comparable shutdown around the globe, other than maybe when the asteroid hit and the dinosaurs all died.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, I think it's more, we feel it differently today because we're so aware of what's happening all over the world. You know, we're aware of how this is impacting us globally, and that's a good thing, but also a scary thing at times.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it absolutely is. Well, we had posted yesterday when I announced that I was going to be doing an interview with you on Facebook and asking people just to sound off and share their questions. So is it okay if I just dive into a couple of those questions that people
Absolutely
are thinking about? And we'll get to as many as we can here. You know, a lot of parents I talk to, and I talk to teachers who are equally concerned as just regular parents. So I don't think that has to do with any expertise level or knowledge level. It's just a reality. Chantel, one of the parents that chimed in, said, how do we continue to reassure our children if they're scared or worried? You know, are there creative ways that you'd recommend talking to kids about this?
Mm-hmm. You know, kids of all ages, what they need most right now, Matt, is our calm presence as adults. You know, even our youngest kids need some space to be able to process their thoughts and feelings about this. And my top recommendation in this regard is to ask first, speak second. You know, especially for our youngest kids, we may not have a clue how much or how little they're picking up on what's happening in the world right now. You know, if you have a 1-year-old who's really not picking up on much of this, it doesn't make sense to have a conversation with scary words like virus or infection if that child is not really wanting to have that discussion and not aware of what's happening. However, the older our kids get, the more aware they're going to become. Now, as a parent of a 3-year-old myself, just the other night, as she was going to bed, she looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Mommy, I'm scared of the virus." And I paused and asked her more about that. And her honest response to me was, "Mommy, I'm scared that the virus is going to come into my bedroom tonight while I'm sleeping." She had in her head this idea that a virus is this big, scary giant of a monster that's going to sneak into her bedroom while she was sleeping. And I sat back, kind of took a deep breath and went, "Oh, wow. You know, my 3-year-old has absolutely no idea what a virus is. I've given her, you know, very little information. I need to work on this." And so we worked on that, and it was a wonderful opportunity for me to educate her at a 3-year-old level about what sickness is, what a virus is, what we can do to help prevent getting sick in our household. So ask first. Make sure you really understand where your child is at, then respond at an appropriate developmental level.
As you do that, and I am looking at a question from Jill that kind of piggybacked on Chantel's question, which is, you know, how do I explain things like no gymnastics, no dance, no playland at the mall, no restaurants, everything's shut down and we're just here. And I mean, you can only tell a kid so many times that you can't go somewhere before you have to at least say something about why. Yeah. Now you mentioned mental levels, and it's going to be different for a 10-year-old than a 3-year-old. But do you have feedback on how to creatively convey that to a child once you ask and find out where they're at?
Yep. You know, there are wonderful resources available online for our youngest kids, especially. One program that I highly recommend is Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood through PBS. They have several different episodes that talk about sickness and hand washing. And those are wonderful episodes to help even our youngest kids begin to understand the concept of an illness that you can catch from other people and what we can do to prevent it. Certainly for our older kids, this is not going to be new news. And reminding them, that things like colds and flus, and this virus included, can be spread through contact with others is an important discussion to have. But I would highly recommend Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood for those young kids to begin to understand what sickness is.
Great.
And honestly, I also don't recommend having that discussion without also making sure that you give kids at all different age groups information about how they can gain some control over this situation. Two things that even the youngest of kids can do well are, number one, practice hand washing. And why not make that fun? I know my girls at home are really into Frozen 2 right now. And so we go to the sink and we sing Let It Go at the top of our lungs. Let it go. As we're scrubbing our hands. And it's great. ABCs, 1, 2, 3s, let it go. Whatever your jam is in your house,
Someone
make
told
it
me,
fun.
Someone told me that the Lord's Prayer is relatively the same length of the ABCs.
Beautiful. Perfect. So to teach them that washing their hands is something they can do well and they can learn to do well. But number two, teaching them that they can be an active part of the household in coming up with creative ways for the family to spend time during this difficult period where we're all asked to stay home. Being cooped up together is a wonderful opportunity for even our youngest kids to practice imagination, to practice getting creative and help the family come up with new games, new ways to spend time together. So to help them see that even in the youngest years, our kids can do something to take some bit of control over the situation that can at times feel helpless.
There you go. And I've noticed as parents that we can fall into two camps. We can fall into the trying to work and pick up after our kids' camp, or we can create some structure. And that structure includes the kids making sure that they clean up their messes, that the parents who are trying to juggle a lot give ownership to their kids over what goes on during the day, and some structure so that they're not completely fishes out of water when they're used to being scheduled from 8 to 3 and even after that with after school activities. So that's one big thing. The other thing I've noticed too is, parents, whether you're a single parent, you're head of household, you're talking with your adult friends on the phone, or your spouse, significant other, there's a lot of hard conversations between adults that are happening right now in terms of just how are we going to do this? How are we going to afford this? What's going to happen? And I've caught my wife and I even talking about those in front of our kids in a way that, that some of those seeds of anxiety can be planted. So just being mindful of, is this the best place to talk through our own fears, or do we need to separate ourselves from the kids so that we don't use adult language to convey our concerns and questions that then they latch onto and say, but I heard you say this to mom.
Absolutely. It's so important right now for us adults to first of all, have compassion with ourselves and realize that being anxious or worried right now is human. It's okay. Yeah. And we need to seek some support around that. We should not be having those conversations around our children, even our teenage children that may seem old enough to hear those things, often aren't emotionally mature enough to be able to really process and handle those things. And so you're absolutely right, Matt. Have those conversations with your spouse, call friends for support, reach out to folks in your network for support so that you're not having those conversations in a way that might cause anxiety for your kids.
There you go. And a kind of a related in-between thing with teenagers right now, especially seniors in high school, they're missing out on some of the things that you just can't redo in summer and fall.
Yeah.
So one of our high school teachers asks, how can high school seniors get closure on a spring with so many loose ends and memories not made? So thinking about missed opportunities. I was on a basketball team and we would have gone to state. Yeah. I'm a senior and we don't have prom, or, assuming a lot of students won't have it. How do you grapple with that, or help your kids grapple with that?
Matt, I've got a couple of thoughts on that. I think the first thing is that we adults around these seniors, around our teenagers, need to remember that right now, we are bombarded with big questions. We're asking to do a lot of hard things to save people's lives. We're talking about life and death in the news. Now, compared to that, missing prom or missing that championship game may seem trivial to those of us who are, decades older and have had those experiences, but we have to remember that this is not trivial to them. These are real losses. Not being able to share in those moments and those memories will continue to be a significant loss for these seniors. And we as the adults around them have to acknowledge that and remember that this is a grieving period for them. And we have to remember that it's okay to be with them in that and validate that it's okay to feel sad. It's okay to feel mad about that. It's okay to feel scared or worried or upset and be with them, in that grief and in that struggle. So that's number one. But number two, also, I think as adults, we have a duty to help those kids also understand the larger picture of what they're doing here. They're being asked to sacrifice those experiences. They're being asked to forego those wonderful pivotal moments that most seniors have the opportunity to share in. And by doing that, they're saving lives. They are saving the lives of our elderly. They are saving the lives of our most weak and vulnerable in our society. And not only our community, but our world does thank them for that. And so I think helping them understand that this isn't just a loss, this is a really meaningful and important sacrifice. And the world is going to thank them for it for years to come is critical.
It's interesting because when you think of the battle on the home front, say during World War II, when they had scrap drive and rubber drive and, all kinds of ways of fighting the battle at home, while we're not sending people overseas, there is that same urgency of everyone has a role to play here. Yeah. And it's not a positive necessarily, but it's a way of saying this isn't just meaningless. There is meaning in what we're doing.
Absolutely.
That's so helpful. Related to mixed families, shifting gears a little bit, we had a number of mixed families chime in and just ask questions about how to go about blended family schedules and concerns when their kiddos sometimes come and go in different households. Mm-hmm. One parent said, this feels to me like a catch-22, where I have to weigh the risks of having kids moving back and forth with the conflict of saying, no, either they can't come here or I'm not sending them anywhere. That's a tough situation to be in as a parent because there's also legal realities that you have to abide by. Have you seen any solutions for that?
Yeah, Matt, this is a really challenging question. You really made an important point a couple minutes ago when you talked about routine being comforting, and I couldn't agree with that more. That if both households are safe places, it is reasonable that routine should be kept. Those kids should be seeing both parents or both caregivers in the same schedule that they typically would, as long as precautions are being taken. So if that child is being transported from one parent's home to another parent's home safely, and they are still practicing social distancing and staying home, even though that may mean two different homes, keeping that routine and that structure may actually be psychologically and emotionally quite good for the kids.
Sure.
However, if there is a higher risk at one of the homes, perhaps a parent who works in a high risk setting, then each family's really got to make some careful decisions about whether it is safe for the child to be in that home at that time. The number one thing that I want to encourage adults in those situations to do is to remember how important healthy communication is. No matter what your relationship is like with the other parent that you are co-parenting with, try to set aside grievances and focus on the kids right now and on their safety and on having calm and healthy conversations with one another. The last thing our kids need is more conflict in the midst of this already, anxiety-provoking time.
Yeah, that's so helpful. And obviously, if there's a disagreement there, you want to work towards compromise if you can keep the kids first. If you can't compromise with a spouse that you once were married to or co-parenting with, that's, I think, where the most difficult situation would be. But I hopefully those are like the rare exceptions, and parents can find ways of at least finding a temporary plan here where we may only be talking about a couple of weeks. And so thinking about this is temporary. I don't need to win. I just need to figure this out for the next couple of weeks.
Absolutely.
That, hopefully, or one day at a time, 1 week at a time, sort of thing.
Yeah.
One line of questioning came about related to just the overall lifestyle shift that has been thrust upon all of us. I myself have found what's that weight in my chest? I got to turn the news off right now. And just the sense of being indoors all day, there's a sense of kind of this depression that can come to your psyche, that when we walked outside, it just lifted off. So one, Callie is asking, how do you manage the sudden lifestyle change in a healthy way without everyone getting on each other's nerves when tensions are already higher than usual, when stress is affecting, everyday functions? So how do you navigate, not being able to balance your time and take your day away at work and come home and give your best to your family or whatever? And it's kind of a backup question to that is, can you think of a small daily shift that adults can make in order to embrace those, just the day ahead? Any thoughts on those pieces?
I do. Gosh, I've got several bubbling around in my head right now. I honestly, Matt, my top recommendation really is to try to focus on the present moment. It is so easy right now to keep our eyes glued to the screen and reading different news stories and worrying ahead about how long this is going to last, what the eventual toll is going to be on our economy, how many deaths there might be by the time this is all over. Our minds can get carried away with all of the negative news when in reality, for most of us right now, as we stop and we breathe in the moment, we remember we're here, we're alive. For most of us, our loved ones are still healthy. Most of us have a meal at some point coming up here for the rest of the day. Most of us are safe and okay right here, right now in this moment. Now, I know we can't guarantee that forever and ever, but it's so important to stop every moment and remember some of the good things around us and some of the ways that we are safe and we are okay in the moment. On a side note, I do highly recommend limiting the news. Even I, as a clinical psychologist with all these tools in my back pocket, am not immune to the effects the news is having on me. I too am trying to limit my news. I pick portions of the day where I do check in and I see what's happening and I read my newsfeed on Facebook, but I limit that purposefully so that I don't end up getting carried away as well. So limit that news, try to focus on the present moment and challenge your mind to come up with at least 2 to 3 good things that are happening right there in the present moment that might bring a sense of hope, a sense of peace, a sense of joy.
That the idea of 2 to 3 positive things, I think most of us would be surprised at first, if you're not used to doing that, how hard that is.
Yeah.
It's like if you take a couple that's arguing and ask them to say something they love about the other, it's like you ask them to become a giraffe. Our minds, especially at a time like this, can get in a rut of seeing problems.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you talked about this in your TED Talk, where we're biologically, we're hardwired to notice problems a lot more than we are to notice flowers, just for self-preservation, which I had never thought of that before. And I was like, bingo, that makes so much sense. Our brains detect threats a lot easier than they do pleasantries and aesthetics. So I've noticed that as I challenge myself or my kids, it's easy even to take those things that you know and turn them into problems. Like, well, I really liked having a walk, but you know what? It's not that warm outside, and I just wish I could do more than walk. Well, that actually isn't doing it. So
Yeah.
would it be fair to say that actually takes practice, and if it's not easy at first, or if you don't magically feel better at first, stick with it?
Yes, absolutely. All the research shows that our brains can change with practice. And so absolutely, Matt, keep trying. Even if you can only come up with one thing, and that one thing is, I'm breathing right now. Let it be that, and keep breathing. Keep noticing what sights, sounds, or smells might be even mildly interesting or pleasant around you. See if you can plan one thing throughout the day that might bring you a sense of joy. For me, it's often my cup of coffee in the morning, early in the morning before my kids wake up. Building those moments into the day right now is even more critical than ever. And I find that many people often forget to do them when they need them most, because we're so hyper focused on trying to solve problems and check in with the news and fix things and predict things, when in reality, the way that we can help ourselves cope best through this is to make sure that we are stopping to acknowledge what good things are happening around us and build in moments of reprieve.
So it's like a muscle. You're saying that the more you practice, it will get stronger.
Yes.
And your mind will start to sculpt itself in a different way of being positive. And if you've ever met someone who is dealing with more than you could ever imagine, who is still positive, it's proof that it can be done, you know? And so if we are able to do it at a time like this, imagine how easy that's going to be when we're through this crisis and maybe facing the next one. We're going to develop that muscle for the next time.
Yeah. The other thing too, Matt, this is related. Sometimes it's also important just to give ourselves some space to feel down or sad too. So often I see folks come into my office who are feeling down and sad, but then they feel like they need to fix it right away. Well, I shouldn't be feeling that way. I need to do something immediately because that's not okay. And sometimes even giving ourselves a couple of minutes just to feel our feelings and acknowledge that this is a tough time. And it's very human to feel a little bit worried, to feel a little bit sad. That can be enough to let it pass and let us continue on with our day too. So allowing ourselves some compassion, some space, and some time to just be human right now, I think is also really important.
I think there's something very, very powerful about making it okay to not feel okay.
Yep.
And not, because you use the word that I think is a real troubling word, and that's the should word.
Yeah.
If the way I feel isn't the way I should feel, something's wrong, and I'm not okay.
Absolutely.
And I've been doing some reading lately based on a lot of our conversations about mindfulness, in which you can actually acknowledge a feeling without having to make a judgment about it, without having to say, that's who I am. You can actually step back from your feelings and say, I'm just going to watch you for a while. And it's amazing when I do that. It's like this spinning orb slows down, goes into slow motion, and loses power over just the biological chemicals firing inside of me.
Absolutely. And there's tons of research, by the way, to support that, physiological research supporting that. We see being able to stop and just acknowledge I feel anxious without that having to be bad or good is a huge skill that we can develop.
Yeah.
Just being aware, noticing, being mindful of how we're feeling and giving ourselves space to do that without having to label it as good or bad.
Yeah. And not overly identifying with your feeling, but saying that that feeling doesn't have to be who I am. That was revolutionary thinking to me,
Absolutely.
because most of the time we kind of function instinctively. If I feel this way, this is how I am feeling. And, that's a fascinating practice, just to get used to kind of sitting, as you said before, just sitting with it, just being with it. The last line here is just, thinking about the one thing you might recommend people take away from today that they could put into practice. If there's just one thing, whether you've said it or not today, that you'd want to send us out thinking about as we go back to what is an undefined period. I mean, if it were 2 days, done. We don't exactly know what the future holds. So given that there's not a lot of definition or a 1-step, 2-step, 3-step plan, we're living in a season of concern and ambiguity. What is that thing that you might recommend? Let's grab a hold of this and let's try it out.
Matt, the word that I think has permeated our discussion in so many ways today is presence. Don't forget to stop and be present. Be present with your kids to really understand what's happening for them and be with them in that place. Be present yourself in the moment to be able to notice what is happening, giving yourself some grace around the emotions you're feeling, and challenging your brain to stop and notice the good things around us that are bringing a sense of hope or safety. Be present with your loved ones. We never really know how long we have, on this earth, in this life. Why not take this opportunity to share our love with the people we care about? Call grandma, talk to your kids, play a board game.
Yeah.
Let's take this period as an opportunity to be fully present with each other and with ourselves, rather than allowing this to carry us away into some negative future or allow too much time to dwell on the past. Let's be present.
I think that's another way of looking at the not thinking about what we can't do right now, because there's a lot of things we can't do. What are those things that I can do to be available to my kids? One of the resources we created also for people to it was a how can we help thing. You print it up at home, and we have a thing on top that says, how can we help? And then just a personal note you write to your neighbor. Is there anything I can do for you? That doesn't ask anybody to take risks that are unnecessary risks, but a neighbor that you don't know what's going on in your neighborhood until your neighbors say, we're here and we remember you. or giving, like you said, we're asking people just to call down our roster, check in. How can we pray for you? How can we support you? There is something powerful, I think, about thinking about what we can do and doing what we can do versus stressing about what we can't do and why. And so I just want to thank you, Tara, for taking some time with us to process and to think about how to be present and how to manage some of the things that everyone's dealing with, not just in Bismarck, not just in North Dakota or America, but all over the world. And you know what? I'd love to do it again sometime when you're not overloaded with people coming to talk to you. So thank you so
I'd be happy to. And thank you, Pastor Matt, for what you're doing. I think this is a fabulous initiative. I'd be happy to come back another time.
Sounds good. Well, maybe we'll meet you soon in the digital sphere. But in the meantime, bless you, bless your important work, and bless your family.
Thank you. You as well.
All right. Well, I'm going to sign up.